Welcome to the L. Ron Hubbard Theater for Youth. We do dramatic readings of fiction stories written by L. Ron Hubbard in the 1930s and 1940s. My name is Swedha, and I'll be the narrator for today's performance. Before we start the show, let me introduce you to our actors. Ethan Wilson. Isis Wilson. Jayden Buckley. LJ Swiercinsky. And Sophia Mintz. Thank you and enjoy the show. When Gilhooly Was in Flower by L. Ron Hubbard. Jigsaw Gilhooly was 1,000 miles deep in thought, which fact was not particularly endearing him to Mary Ann Marlow. He sat on her front porch, looked off into the purple expanses, and gnawed upon a wheat straw. He looked idiotic when he sat like that, thought Mary Ann. His eyes got out of focus, and he was limp enough normally, but now? Apparently, he was a sober-faced, gangling walking stick of a puncher without any sense of humor. But Gilhooly had ideas. He had big ideas. And right now, he was wondering just how to get around to fixing life so that he could ask Mary Ann to be his forevermore. It all required considerable logic, and when it came to mathematical reasoning, Jigsaw Gilhooly was aces up, though sometimes the least bit slow. Disgustedly, Mary Ann, who taught school to the 3 kids in Gunpowder Gulch, picked up a copy of Ivanhoe and tried to read to get her mind off the way Gilhooly looked when he was jigsawing. Most of the men in the Painted Youth's country had told her she was beautiful, and she believed them, a little, and therefore it grieved her that Gilhooly paid such scant attention. Most of the men in the Painted Youth's country had told her that she was a fool for seeing anything in Jigsaw Gilhooly, as he had neither looks, nor fortune, nor reputation. And little Mary Ann was beginning to believe them. A little. Gilhooly sat and chewed his straw and focused his eyes on the back of his head, thus circumnavigating the globe with a blink. His problem was somewhat complex. He had 300 acres of his own and a square mile of range rented. He had 40 head of cattle. He had a house which could stand both straightening and improvement. Several gentlemen had lately offered him a fancy price, and he thought maybe he ought to sell and get another place before he asked Mary Ann. And that was not all. These gentlemen were sheepmen. If sheep got a foothold on the Painted Buttes range, there wouldn't be any stopping them. Now, it was either asking Mary Ann to marry on $2 and staying loyal to his kind, or it was asking Mary Ann to marry on $1,500 and going in debt for a place good enough for her. So the problem shifted back and forth, and so did the straw, and Gilhooly kept his eyes on the back of his head via China.
Stop it!
Gilhooly looked at her in astonishment.
Stop looking like a shorthorn. Jigs Gilhooly, sometimes I think you're a fool, and other times I'm certain of it.
Ma'am? Said the startled Gilhooly.
Why don't you be a man?
Demanded Mary Ann, brown eyes flashing.
Why do you have to say and moon about some crazy problem when you rode 15 miles to see me?
That's right.
What's right?
I did ride 15 miles to see you.
She subsided, beaten. Ivanhoe was clutched in her small, desperate hand, and she felt like throwing it at him.
Now you're mad. I didn't mean to do anything. What's wrong?
Oh,
said Mary Ann in a small voice, and then, sitting up like a cottontail and looking earnestly at him,
the trouble with you, Jigs Gilhooly, is you aren't romantic.
Me?
You.
But
he stopped, baffled.
What do you mean romantic?
Like Brian Dubois Joubert, or Ivanhoe, or...
Like who? Nobody by them names has a spread around here.
Of course they have it. Their outfits are over in England and France and places.
Huh. Foreigners.
Foreigners or not, Jigs Gilhooly, if you ever expect me to pay any attention to any offer you might have to make, you'll mend your ways, and that's final.
You mean be romantic? But gee, Marianne, I don't know anything about it.
An inspiration hit her. She closed the book with a thump and handed it to him.
When you've read this, you can come see me again, but not until.
Gilhooly was routed. He took the book as though it had a rattler between the covers and held it away from him, looking at it. But when he looked back at Mary Ann, he could see with but half an eye that she meant what she said. This was a new angle to the problem. He hadn't thought about her not wanting to marry him. But the solution was offered. He would have to read this book and be romantic. He tipped his hat.
Yes, ma'am.
And backed off the porch. He climbed his Mustang, Calico, tipped his hat again to Mary Ann, and neck-brained away to proceed down the wagon tracks through the sagebrush. When he was a mile or so from the house, still in view behind him, he told Calico,
Pick your own gopher holes to fall into. I got some studying to do.
and so it was that Jigsaw Gilhooly began to read of the days when knighthood was in flower. Two bits worth of midnight oil later, Jiggs Gilhooly guided Calico on to the field of honor. Pennons fluttered and queens waved and armor flashed all about him. Mary Ann threw a glove toward him for an amulet, and then, drawing up and lowering the shade of his visor, he glared through the slits at Brian Dubois-Gibert, who stood snorting evilly on the other side of the tilt course. It happened, at this time, that a gentleman by the name of Fallon, who was known for determination, and his friend Billings Dwight topped the bluff above the Gilhooly Ranch.
What the devil?
Said Fallon thickly, pulling in and staring. Billings Dwight stared too.
You must be plumb loco, Fallon. Maybe I better pot shop him with this shot, son.
And put it away.
Below them, in a flat field, Gilhooly sat upon a much-altered calico. A fly net decked the horse, but that was not the most astonishing thing about the ensemble. Gilhooly had a long pine pole in his hand with something which looked like a boxing glove on the far end. He had twisted his holster around so that he could couch this crude lance. On his head, he had a water pail with holes in front and something which appeared to be a hearse plume bobbing above it. 30 yards away, a longhorn bull pawed earth and blew, and was not particularly aware that he was no one but Brian Dubois-Gibert. Sir Gilhooly tensed in his saddle and lowered the lance. He jabbed spur to a nervous Calico, and they lunged at him, straight at the longhorn. Calico's hooves thundered. Sir Gilhooly yelled. Ah! The bull started a rolling charge of his own. Two irresistible forces met in mid-flight. The lance hit the bull's shoulder just as the longhorn swerved. The impact picked Sir Gilhooly out of the saddle like a pebble from a slingshot, and then, like a pole vaulter's pole, it arced Sir Gilhooly through the air. He swooped to a loud landing 30 feet beyond the longhorn. The bull turned. He saw his man dismounted. He started to charge, horns lowered. But Calico was a trained cow pony, and like all such, riderless or no, he would ride down a bull. He streaked in from the right, shoulder to shoulder with the racing longhorn. The bull was not right. He thought this was another rider. He swerved away, and Calico dived in toward Sir Gilhooly, who grabbed the horn and swung aboard. He reached down, scooped up the lance and bucket, and then scowled at the bull.
That's only 10 times, Sir Brian. But we shall meet in mortal combat yet again.
Up on the ridge, Fallon and Billings Dwight were agape with wonder.
I tell you
Said Billings.
that I better pick him off before he...
No.
Said Fallon, scrubbing his bluish jaw.
No murder in this deal. Yet.
They spurred forward and trotted down into the pasture. Somewhat confused, Gilhooly turned to meet them. He didn't know what to do with the lance and made a useless attempt to hide the 20-foot pine stick behind his back.
Hello?
Said Fallon, cautiously. Gilhooly nodded. He did not like sheepmen, and he especially did not like Billings, Dwight, and Fallon. But just now he was red of face.
Yeah?
Said the late Sir Gilhooly.
Gilhooly. We come over to see if you was going to sell us that place and give us that lease.
I ain't decided.
You mean you won't?
Well, I've been thinking it over. It would be a damn shame to let sheep on this range. I got the only water around that's worth anything for 25 miles. And if they was sheep on this place, the cows wouldn't come within a mile of the troughs if they was dying of thirst. Fallon, I think maybe it would be a mistake to let you have this place for any money.
Fallon stayed the black rage which began to rise within him.
You know what might happen to you, Gilhooly?
Maybe, but it'd take more than a pair of buzzards to do it.
Fallon turned to his friend.
Come on, Billings. He's crazier than we thought.
As they rode away, they were conscious of Gilhooly's eyes upon their backs.
Think he's nutty?
Said Billings.
No,
Said Fallon, black eyes narrow.
it's that Mary Ann Marlow. That's my guess. I think it's right.
Say,
Said Billings, pushing his shabby hat over his brow.
you don't want no murder because we got to keep our noses clean or else we can't get Jack advanced.
Yeah, no murder.
And if we can get Gilhooly's whales, we can buy out the rest of this range for a song, because the Jack will be coming fast, and we can hire a young army to keep the punchers off of us.
Yeah. What you driving at?
Well, we got to force Gilhooly, and we can't kill him. But there ain't no statute about kidnapping around here that I ever heard of. Only murder. And as Gilhooly is crazy about this Mary Ann Marlow,
You don't have to draw pictures. If we do that, we can force Gilhooly to sell and shut his mouth afterwards by telling the cattlemen are out to hang him for making the sale. That's a good idea. Don't you think so, Billings?
Billings Dwight was enough of a diplomat to let Fallon keep the change. He only nodded.
Now let's see. Next Sunday, she'll be home from that school. Nobody will be around. We walk in there. Say, we better get Stogie to come along and help. Gilhooly might walk in. He goes and sees her Sundays sometimes.
yeah,
Said the diplomat Billings.
that's a good idea, Fallon.
It was Sunday morning, and the trees were singing, and the birds were shining, and the sun was in bloom. And Sir Gilhooly trotted along Yea Calico toward Yea Towers of Marlow. As he went, he couched his lance and picked a sleeping rattler off a rock, and threw the startled reptile about 90 feet away. A horned toad also got an aerial trip, and Gilhooly was pretty proud of his prowess. True, he was black and blue all over from his encounters with Brian de Boisgebert, and the tin pail was dented badly, and was frying hot in the desert sun, but that made no difference. The red-bound copy of Ivanhoe was in his saddlebag, and Lady Mary Ann was due for a big and wondrous surprise. If this was being romantic, it was all right with Jigsaw Gilhooly. In the far distance, he could see the house, and he trotted along for 3 miles or so, observing it closely to make certain that Mary Ann had neither family at home nor callers. Usually the Marlows went over to church in Gunpowder Gulch, but Mary Ann did so much platform work during the week herself that she always took off Sunday as her own day of rest. In jubilance at the final discovery that the place was deserted, Gilhooly spurred Calico to a trot and picked up a Gila monster with his lance. When the spiny gentleman hit, he sat up and stuck out his tongue and tromped around in a circle, showing indignation. Sir Gilhooly arrived before the clapboard towers of Marlow, pointed his lance at the sizzling zenith and cried,
Hist, Lady Mary Ann!
and then, more loudly,
How now?
the weather-beaten old house remained quiet. Gilhooly raised his voice and repeated, and then, in sudden doubt,
Hey, Mary Ann, it's just me.
and still, nothing happened. Puzzled, Gilhooly said,
You see anything of her, Calico?
Calico stirred and swished at the flies. Gilhooly anchored him to the wind and got down, thrusting his lance into the earth. He went into the house and stood while his eyes adjusted themselves to the dim interior. And then his glance lighted upon a tidy, out of place. That would never happen in Mrs. Marlow's house. Again, there was some dust upon the floor, and he got down on his knees and picked up a torn bit of gingham. A flood of unreasoning terror took him. He jumped to his feet and stared all about him. He went swiftly to the kitchen, and there he found a chair overturned. Just outside the back door, he saw that the loose dust had been disturbed by long scrapes as though somebody had been dragged unwillingly across it. Hurrying on this trail, he came to a gulch and found that many horses had been there. He tried to count them, but he was too excited for accurate tracking. Disaster had come to the Marlow ranch, and that was all that Gilhooly could register. He whistled excitedly for Calico, and the pony came, tripping on his reins. Gilhooly mounted with a rush, and he spurred around the house. He caught up his lance as he passed it, and then swerved back to catch the other trail. One horse had a notch gone from its shoe, and by this mark, Gilhooly could follow on the trodden wagon trail.
It's Fallon!
Said Gilhooly with the wind in his teeth.
It's that dirty sheepherder Fallon!
Beyond that, he could not go. He accredited Fallon with no great strategy, but only remembered that Mary Ann Marlow was a lovely girl, much in demand, but, for some reason which had always been wondrous to Gilhooly, giving most of her time to one, Jiggs Gilhooly. And because he had never been able to figure out why she was at all interested in him, he was now more anxious than ever to prove up. And as he rode, he pictured what would happen to Fallon. But Gilhooly completely forgot that he had left his 6-gun home, because he needed the empty holster for a lance pouch. He did not even have his Winchester. 6 men, probably. But the way Gilhooly felt, the 6 might as well have been 600. He balanced his lance and forgot to remember that a rifle bullet can reach 8,000 yards with fair accuracy, whereas his lance in the same length of time could reach about 30 feet. He had only read Ivanhoe, and so he did not know that chivalry had died as the bullet progressed. Fallon had a prospector's cabin perched precariously on a hillside above a dry stream bed. Above it, 5 horses filed along the steep trail, picking their careful ways until they reached the flat ground beneath the sad shack. Fallon eased his stick bolt to earth and grinned at Mary Ann.
Now, if you don't mind, young lady, we'll take you in to sit and think for a spell.
You'd better watch out.
Said Mary Ann, her brown eyes sparkling with anger.
If Jiggs tracks you to this place, he'll shoot that grin off your face and hang it off from the wall. Oh.
Fallon appreciated the brave, if empty, statement. He grinned more broadly.
Yeah, you didn't see what me and Billings saw last week. Your honey lamb was out pushing a longhorn around with a long stick.
Mary Ann stared down at Fallon.
He was what?
You heard me. He's been chewing on loco weed, sweetheart. You got as much chance of him coming over here to break you out with bullets as he has of saying no to me now. You get inside and be quiet. I'll go over and see if Gilhooly will buy you back.
Mary Ann had never had any real reason to be sure of Gilhooly. He might or might not be dumb, and he might or might not be brave, but she wanted very badly to believe that he was bright and brave, and so she said that he was in no uncertain terms.
I tell you that he'll take you apart. You can't browbeat him into doing anything he doesn't want to. You want his ranch so you can sell all the ranch for nothing, and when the next dry season comes. But Jiggs won't give in, not him. You'd better start leaving the country before he hears about this outrage.
Big talk.
Grinned Fallon, scrubbing his thick jaw and chuckling.
This afternoon, I think you'll find out just how brainy and brave this Gilhooly jet is. When he comes here, I'll be leading him, and he'll be as docile as a spring lamb.
Mary Ann wanted to disbelieve that, but she was almost certain it was true. Never in the career of Jiggs Gilhooly had anyone said that he was dangerous. And too late, she knew that she had accepted his attention to the exclusion of others merely because his company was usually so restful after a hard week's teaching. And true, she had wanted him to be romantic, but... Fallon hauled her down off the horse, pushed her into the cabin, and shut the door. Stogie was a little nervous, not liking anything too lawless, but not lacking in bravery.
You sure about this Gilhooly gent?
Yeah, of course I'm sure.
He spat into the dust.
He's big and dumb.
How about this?
Said Stogie, jerking his thumb at the cabin.
Her. How about it, Billings?
Billings grinned.
Oh, by the time the country gets warmed up about this, we'll have Gilhooly's ranch. And as soon as we get that, we get all the money we need. It's being promised.
Stogie looked a little more convinced and got down. Fallon turned his horse around and then mounted.
And now, gents, you stay here and keep an eye peeled. I'm going to ride over to Gilhooly's and ask him for his signature. This is too easy.
Fallon spurred his Mustang up the trail and over the canyon edge to trot out across the sage-covered plain. He was in a very happy mood, as he had never been more certain of anything in his life. He rode about a mile before he saw the approaching horseman. Once in a while, light flashed from bright metal, and suddenly, Fallon knew that it was Gilhooly.
Huh. He come right along after all.
Gilhooly was coming, with all the speed that Calico could thunder out of the road. He saw Fallon in the distance and, without slackening pace, narrowed the gap to 100 yards. Then, he slowed to a walk, and Fallon slowed to a walk, and watchfully, they approached each other.
Where's Marianne?
Shouted Gilhooly. Fallon looked at the tin pail and the long pine stick and chuckled.
She's safe enough. Thanks for riding over, Gilhooly. You saved me the trouble of finding you.
What for?
Why, you will sell me your place and water's rights. You get back Marianne. It's as easy as that.
They were less than 100 feet apart now, both coming to a halt.
I got it figured out right. If I sell, you'll block off the whales, and the next dry season you can buy the whole range for a song. The ranchers around here would be pretty mad at me, Fallon. It ain't a deal.
No. Well, my boy, it is a deal. But the price is only $1,000 now. If you don't sell, I can't promise what'll happen to Marianne Marlow.
You getting hard-boiled?
Yeah.
Okay, mister! You asked for it!
And before the startled Fallon could so much as blink, Gilhooly quirted Calico and leveled the long lance and charged straight at Fallon. It was a terrifying thing to see that spear coming, but Fallon had plenty of time to draw, and draw he did. He snapped a quick and accurate shot at Gilhooly's thigh, and the puncher was almost jerked out of his saddle. But the lance was still in line and still coming. With a thump, the button slammed Fallon in the chest, picked him off his Mustang, and threw him to earth. The tip struck down, dug sawed, and before Gilhooly could free it, the pine was snapped in two sections with such force that he too was hurled from his saddle. He hit rolling and ended up not 10 feet from Fallon, who was scrambling madly for his lost colt. Gilhooly dived, but he was too late. Fallon, bruised, blowing, and mad, towered above the puncher, colt leveled.
Funny, ain't ya?
Snapped Fallon.
I ought to plug you.
Gilhooly sat still. His thigh was numb, and a hole in the batwing told him where the bullet had gone in.
Ain't so full of ginger now, are you?
Gilhooly glared through the slits of the water pail and said nothing.
You changed your mind now?
Challenged Fallon.
What else can I do?
Said Gilhooly in a dull voice. Fallon relaxed a little and grinned. He looked around to see his own pony fleeing for home. Calico was standing by and Fallon approached. Calico shied away, but Fallon got the rein.
You gonna leave me here?
Said Gilhooly.
No.
Said Fallon. He mounted and Calico laid back his ears and lugged. But Fallon courted him into docility and almost broke his jaw with the bit.
No.
Said Fallon, finishing a sentence.
But I ain't going to walk. Come on, puncher. March.
But my leg.
Protested Gilhooly, trying to walk. Then he picked up a 5-foot section of the broken lance and pried himself from the earth. Using the pine as a crutch, he began to hitch himself along.
Faster. I ain't got all day.
Gilhooly hippity-hopped faster, head down.
This is too easy. I never did think you had any guts, Gilhooly. We'll go down to my place and sign. But I've cut the price. You don't get but $500. I can't pay you less without making it suspicious. That all right with you?
He added unnecessarily.
You know,
Said Gilhooly in a dull voice.
And after you get paid, you can leave the country. It won't be healthy for you. Understand?
Gilhooly didn't answer. He stumped dejectedly along, never turning to look at Fallon. They came at long last to the rim above the cabin. Gilhooly was played out from loss of blood and the hot sun, and it was all he could do to make it down the trail to the dilapidated shack. Mary Ann was looking out the window at him, and there was both pity and disappointment on her face. But there was no respect. For her, Gilhooly had passed out of the reach of any respect. He looked so ridiculous with that pail on his head, and she judged that his wound would not be serious, or else he could not walk at all. She felt pity, and pity is the pallbearer of love. Fallon got down. Stogie and Billings got up from a patch of shade and walked over, gazing amusedly at Gilhooly.
He tried to get tough, but I took all the fight out of him. Creased his leg and you think he was killed. Ain't that right, Gilhooly?
Gilhooly looked at the ground through the slits in the pail and said nothing.
Go on inside.
Said Fallon, booting Gilhooly. Gilhooly walked with difficulty through the door. There was a chair beside the table, and he sat down upon it, shoulders slumped in dejection. He would not look up to meet the contempt in Mary Ann's eyes. Fallon was joyously overbearing. He hauled out some printed forms, some ink and a pen, and shoved them at Gilhooly.
The more I think about it, the more I think it would be a shame to spend money on you, Gilhooly. Supposing we make this for $10. Is that all right?
He challenged. Sorrowfully, Gilhooly nodded. His hand was shaking when he picked up the pen. He dipped it in the ink and tried to make a mark with it. Stogie and Billings were standing around grinning. The pen would not write.
I got another one.
Stated Fallon with the air of a man of property. He turned around and rummaged in a box against the far wall. Gilhooly was still half leaning on his crutch. Stogie and Billings turned to watch Fallon search. And suddenly, the cabin exploded. Ah! Stogie saw the stick whip level and he dived for his gun. But before he could draw, hard pine hit him between the eyes and he was slammed sideways against Billings. Billings whirled with a warning yell and grabbed at his own gun. Whack! And his wrist was broken. With a backhand on the same sweep, Gilhooly smashed Stogie's nose all over his face. Fallon roared with anger and leapt up. Gilhooly struck him, but Fallon had time to dodge. The pine stick failed to crash into the door and drop outside. Gilhooly and Fallon collided in the middle of the room. Fallon had no time to draw. Gilhooly's fists were too swift, and Fallon's countering blows elicited yells of pain from him. His knuckles were smashed against the improvised helmet. Billings was scrambling for a gun on the floor. Gilhooly leapt up and back, and his heels crunched down on Billings' fingers. Whirling Fallon around with a right, Gilhooly plucked the Colt from its holster and then, reversing its butt, began to get in some work. The cabin floor was covered with dust that now began to rise chokingly in the room. Through this fog of battle, Mary Ann, pressing the far wall with her back, saw a monster with a shining helmet take 3 men apart with such savage efficiency that it killed her. Billings was out of it, a stumbling block on the floor. Stogie could not see for blood, and a final crack on the head spilled him into the ashes of the fireplace. Billings came to and came up, fighting. He fired once, but he did not fire twice. Like a javelin thrower, Gilhooly lanced Billings out through a back window, and Billings started an avalanche as he went down the slope. Gilhooly's helmet had come off in the fray, and now, face streaked with sweat and eyes wild with battle, he advanced one final time upon the flailing fists of Fallon. There was a swift exchange of cracking blows, and suddenly Fallon collapsed over Stogie. Methodically, Gilhooly reached down and yanked Fallon to his feet, only to knock him over again.
Don't kill him!
Gilhooly picked Fallon up and carried him to the water barrel and dumped him in it upside down. Then he set the bedraggled sheepman in what was left of the chair. Slowly, Fallon came around. He looked up and saw Gilhooly's set jaw and quailed.
Don't hit me again,
pleaded Fallon, bending off.
You're dumb. You are the dumbest man I have ever met, in fact.
How was I to know you wasn't hit?
whined Fallon.
You wasn't square.
I'm being square now!
Said the awful specter of fury which was Gilhooly.
You want my place? Well, I'm gonna sell you land, see? I'm gonna sell you land and it's gonna cost you $1,500.
You'll sell?
Gaped Fallon. Gilhooly snatched the forms to him and grabbed the pen. He scrawled names and locations onto the dotted lines and then signed at the bottom. He reversed the paper and handed the pen. Fallon read, and what he read thought must be distorted by his swelling eyes.
But you're only selling me 1 acre. You're selling me 1 acre on the driest part of your land. You can't do this. I won't.
Gilhooly's voice was quiet, but Gilhooly's voice went through Fallon's head like a bullet.
Sign and get the money.
Fallon looked at Gilhooly's face, and then Fallon signed. He stumbled over to the box against the back wall and dug out an iron container. Dolefully, he counted the contents and found $1,545. Gilhooly snapped it out of his hands.
The $45 is rent on my horse. Now get out of here. Kick some life into those gents and travel. And don't come near the Painted Buttes country no more.
He collected the guns and strung them on a piece of wire and went outside to hook them over Calico's horn. Mary Ann was watching him with wide eyes. He came back and suddenly he picked her up and carried her out and put her on Stogie's sorrel. The three were collected now. They mounted, watching Gilhooly for any swift move, and then, almost gladly, they rode up the trail and out of sight.
Oh, Jigs, I never saw anything so wonderful in my life. To fool them into thinking you were wounded, and then beating them up, and then getting $1,545.
I didn't fool them.
Said Gilhooly, tenderly regarding his leg.
But say, you know that guy Ivanhoe?
Yes, Jigs?
He was a fake.
What?
Yeah. Why the dickens didn't you tell me that being romantic was just beating up guys with your bare fists? You just saved me a pile of trouble.